A terrified German shepherd cowered in the corner of a shelter, until a little puppy and a quiet man changed everything. But just when healing began, a stranger appeared. And what the dog did next left everyone speechless. A true story of loyalty, trauma, and a bond that defied fate. Before you scroll away, people watch my videos every day, they enjoy them, but it's like the subscribe button is their enemy. Come on, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and you'll get a heartfelt blessing. The animal shelter was always loud, filled with barks that bounced off the concrete walls and echoed down the rows of metal kennels. But in one dim corner, behind a rusted gate marked, "Do not approach," there was silence. Inside that kennel, curled so tightly against the farthest wall he nearly disappeared into shadow, was a German shepherd no one could touch. They called him Ghost. No one knew his real name. No one knew exactly where he'd come from. Animal control had picked him up from the outskirts of town, emaciated and covered in cuts. His right ear had a notch missing, and one eye was clouded over. He hadn't growled or barked when they found him, just stared with hollow eyes that looked through people rather than at them. The shelter staff tried everything. Food, toys, soft voices. Nothing worked. He wouldn't eat unless no one was watching. Wouldn't move unless the lights were out. And if anyone came close, he'd tremble so hard his entire body would rattle the metal cage. "He's broken," one of the volunteers whispered once. But Ellie, the shelter manager, didn't like that word. "He's not broken," she always corrected gently. "He's just waiting for something." Days passed, then weeks. People came and went, families looking for the perfect puppy, couples who stopped to pat the playful Labradors or coo over the poodles. No one looked in Ghost's direction, and if they did, they moved on quickly. Until the day Jack walked in. He wasn't flashy. Late 30s, jeans, boots worn from years of walking. He moved like someone used to silence, like someone who didn't need to fill space with noise. Ellie greeted him with her usual warmth. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked. He paused. "Just looking." She gave the usual tour, showing him the puppies first, then the adult dogs. He nodded politely, offered a hand to sniff, gave a few quiet rubs to eager heads pressed through bars. But as they neared the last row, something shifted. Jack stopped, his gaze locked on the shadow in the corner. "That one," he said softly. Ellie's face faltered. "That's Ghost. He doesn't come near anyone. We don't show him to visitors anymore." "May I?" Jack asked, not moving yet. She hesitated. "He won't come to you. He doesn't even let us in the kennel unless he's hiding behind the cot." Jack just nodded. "I won't rush him." He approached slowly. No words, no outstretched hand. He simply sat cross-legged outside the kennel, his back against the opposite wall. And then he waited. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. Ghost didn't move. Jack didn't either. That first day he sat for an hour, said nothing, then stood and left with a quiet, "See you soon." He came back the next day, and the next. Each time he did the same thing. Saturday, waited, and left without trying to touch or speak. And something started to change. It was small at first. Ghost stopped trembling. Then one day he peeked out from under his paw. Another day he shifted just slightly closer. By the end of the first week, his head was fully visible, resting on his paws, eyes alert. "He watches you when you leave," Ellie told Jack on the 10th visit. Jack only nodded. "He's remembering how to see people." On the 12th day, Ghost stood up. It was slow, awkward, like he wasn't sure his legs would hold, but he stood and took one step, then two, then sat down again halfway to the gate. Ellie held her breath from the office, watching on the monitor. Jack still didn't move, but he smiled. On the 15th visit, something remarkable happened. Ghost stood, walked to the front of the kennel, and lay down with his nose pressed through the bars. When Jack reached out, the shepherd didn't flinch. Instead, he closed his eyes and stayed still as Jack's fingers brushed lightly against his muzzle. It was the first time anyone had touched him without fear, or been allowed to. Ellie came out, her eyes glassy. "I think he wants you." Jack looked up at her, and for a moment his calm exterior cracked. There was pain in his eyes, history, something unspoken. "I know what it's like," he said. "To be stuck in a corner, afraid to come out." She didn't ask questions. Some stories were written in silence. They began the adoption process that same day. Ellie explained that Ghost would need time. Lots of it. He had trauma, likely from abuse or neglect. He might never be a normal dog. Jack nodded. "Neither am I." The day Ghost left the shelter, no one expected a celebration. But as Jack opened the kennel gate and Ghost stepped forward, there was a collective hush from the staff. He didn't bolt, didn't cower. He just stood tall, frail, scarred but proud, and followed Jack without a leash. Like he knew. Like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Ellie whispered under her breath, "Something incredible just began." But the most incredible part? That was still to come. The months after Ghost's adoption passed in a quiet rhythm, each day a small victory. Jack's home was far from perfect. A modest apartment on the edge of town with creaky floors and a narrow hallway. But it was safe. It was quiet. And it was all Ghost needed. At first, the German Shepherd stayed mostly in the corner of the living room, his favorite spot near the window where sunlight would filter through the blinds. Jack kept to his routine, simple things, waking early, brewing coffee, and letting Ghost out into the small backyard to explore. The dog always took his time, sniffing every blade of grass like it was the first time he'd ever smelled earth. Jack didn't rush him. They were both learning patience. Some mornings, Ghost would wander over to Jack's feet as he sipped his coffee, nudging his leg gently as if to say, "I'm here, I'm safe." Other times, he would remain in his corner, staring out the window, lost in thoughts Jack could never understand. But that was fine. Jack didn't need answers. He just needed Ghost to trust him. And little by little, that trust began to grow. Ghost's body softened. His once skeletal frame filled out, the fur around his neck growing thick and glossy. His eyes, once vacant and distant, began to brighten with recognition. He would wag his tail when Jack returned home from work, the once stiff movements now flowing with a little more ease. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, as Jack returned from a particularly grueling day at the construction site, he opened the door to find Ghost standing at the window, watching for him. It was something Jack had never seen before, a dog waiting with anticipation, rather than hiding in the shadows. Ghost's ears perked up as Jack's footsteps approached. He wagged his tail slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Jack smiled. "Hey, boy," he said softly. He knelt down, reaching for the dog's head, and for the first time in weeks, Ghost leaned into the touch. Jack gently scratched behind his ears, feeling the familiar warmth of his companion. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear. As the days turned into weeks, Ghost's comfort with Jack grew even more. And then, one chilly November afternoon, something changed in the air, an unspoken shift, a tension that seemed to settle deep in the bones of the house. It was almost like the quiet before a storm, a feeling Jack couldn't quite explain. But it was there, in the way Ghost's ears flicked nervously every time a car passed by the window. Jack stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, his hand still wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. He noticed how the dog had been pacing in front of the door, occasionally letting out a soft whine. It was unlike Ghost to be so restless. But Jack didn't know what to do. He hadn't seen any signs of illness, hadn't noticed anything that would warrant such anxiety. Suddenly, without warning, Ghost bolted from the living room and headed for the back door. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Ghost's behavior had always been unpredictable, but this felt different, urgent. He followed him outside. The air was cold, a biting wind sweeping through the yard. Ghost was pacing back and forth near the fence, his body low to the ground. Jack stepped closer, confused, until he heard it. A distant sound, muffled and faint, coming from beyond the trees. A soft cry. At first, Jack thought he was imagining things, but then the cry came again, louder this time, tinged with pain. Ghost stopped pacing and stared into the woods, his body taut with tension. "Are you hearing this?" Jack whispered to no one in particular. Ghost growled low in his throat, his gaze locked on the dense thicket ahead. Without hesitation, he turned and bolted toward the trees, his ears flattened against his head. Jack rushed after him, calling out, "Ghost!" "Wait." But the dog didn't stop. He was driven by something Jack couldn't understand, his instincts leading him toward the source of the sound. The woods were dark and dense, the trees looming overhead like sentinels. Jack fought through the underbrush, his breath quickening as he tried to catch up with Ghost. The cries grew louder, more frantic. Then, just as Jack thought he might lose the dog, Ghost stopped in front of a thick bush, his body tense and unmoving. Jack caught up to him and crouched beside him, heart pounding. "What is it, boy?" Then he saw it. A small bundle, barely visible beneath the brush, was trembling in the cold. At first, Jack thought it was a piece of trash, but as he drew closer, he saw the trembling shape, a puppy, no more than a few months old, its fur matted and dirty. Its ribs were visible beneath its thin coat, and its eyes were wide with fear. "Hey there," Jack murmured, reaching carefully for the puppy. He gently lifted it from the brush, cradling it in his arms. He didn't resist, too weak to fight. Ghost stood beside him, his eyes locked on the pup. And for the first time since Jack had adopted him, there was something in his gaze. Something protective. Something that spoke of a bond far deeper than anyone could have known. Jack held the puppy close, feeling the warmth of its tiny body against his chest. "We're going to take care of you," he whispered, glancing at Ghost. "Just like I promised." Ghost wagged his tail softly, as if he understood. The puppy, barely clinging to life, trembled in Jack's arms as he made his way back to the house. Ghost followed silently, his head low, his eyes never leaving the fragile creature. The wind had picked up, biting through Jack's jacket, but the urgency, he felt, didn't let up. There was something about this moment, a connection he couldn't explain. It wasn't just about saving this puppy. It was as though he was witnessing something profound, something that ran deeper than just a man rescuing a dog. When Jack stepped into the warmth of his home, he immediately rushed the puppy to the bathroom. He laid the trembling creature on a towel and began assessing its condition. Its fur was dirty, caked with mud and debris, and its small body was too thin. But there was a spark in its eyes, albeit weak, that told Jack this puppy was a fighter. He quickly ran a warm bath, gently cleaning the puppy's fur, watching as the dirt and grime swirled away in the water. The puppy whimpered as the warmth hit its sore body, but it didn't pull away. Jack worked swiftly, wrapping the puppy in a clean towel when he was finished, his hands gentle yet firm as he dried it off. Ghost stood at the bathroom door, his eyes fixed on the puppy, his ears flicking at every sound. Jack turned to him, offering a soft smile. "Hey, you're a good boy, aren't you?" Ghost didn't respond with his usual wagging tail. Instead, he took a cautious step forward, his nose twitching as he sniffed at the puppy. Then, for the first time since Jack had known him, Ghost did something unexpected. He sat down beside the puppy, watching over it with an intensity that was nothing short of protective. Jack raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the gesture. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he had the sense that Ghost was taking on the role of guardian, as if he instinctively knew the puppy was under his protection now. For the next few hours, Jack worked to nurse the puppy back to health. He fed it some broth and small bits of soft food, coaxing it to eat slowly. Ghost stayed close, occasionally glancing up at Jack as if seeking approval, as though he had claimed this mission as his own. Jack noticed how the dog's posture had shifted. No longer was he the fearful, withdrawn animal he had been when he first arrived. Ghost was now attentive, focused, his protective instincts sharpening in a way Jack had never seen before. By nightfall, the puppy's condition had stabilized. It was still weak, its breathing shallow, but the shivering had ceased. It lay curled up on the towel, nestled against the warmth of a small heat lamp Jack had set up. Ghost remained by its side, keeping watch, his body tense but calm. Jack settled down on the couch, weary but satisfied with the progress the puppy had made. He reached for the remote and flicked on the TV, but his eyes kept drifting to the two animals in the room, Ghost and the tiny puppy. There was something powerful about the bond forming between them, something far beyond the instinctual protectiveness that Ghost was showing. It was a bond that spoke to Jack's heart in a way that was impossible to ignore. Just as Jack was about to get up and check on the puppy again, a soft sound broke through the silence, the faintest whimper from the puppy. It was barely audible, but it was enough to catch Jack's attention. His heart clenched, and he quickly rose to his feet, crossing the room in 2 quick strides. The puppy's eyes were wide, and it was looking up at him with a gaze that was full of trust and vulnerability. Jack knelt down, his heart pounding in his chest, and extended his hand slowly toward the tiny creature. At first, the puppy flinched slightly, but then it reached out, its tiny paw touching Jack's fingers gently. It was a simple gesture, but to Jack, it felt like a promise. The puppy was surrendering to the care he had offered, placing its trust in him. Ghost, ever vigilant, took a step closer and nudged Jack's hand with his nose. Jack glanced at him, startled by the gesture. Ghost had always been the one to keep his distance, but now it was as if he was urging Jack to understand something. A deep, unspoken truth that had come to light. Jack sat back on the floor, his heart full as he continued to pet the puppy. Ghost lay beside them, his body relaxed for the first time in days. The tension that had gripped him for so long seemed to melt away as he settled into his new role, one of protector, one of family. As the night wore on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something profound, not just in Ghost, but in himself, too. It was as if the very act of rescuing this tiny life had somehow rescued him as well. The fear that had once kept him awake at night, the sense of loneliness that had always lurked in the corners of his mind, now seemed a little less heavy. It was as if, in that moment, he and Ghost had both found something they had been searching for. A purpose, a connection, a reason to keep moving forward. But there was still one question that lingered in Jack's mind. Why had Ghost brought him here? Why had he been so determined to rescue this puppy, despite his own past of trauma and fear? Was it just instinct? Or was there something deeper at play? Something far beyond the scope of what Jack could understand? The answer, Jack realized, would take time to reveal itself. But for now, He was content to sit beside the two animals, one rescued and the other healing, knowing that, together, they were stronger than any of them had ever been alone. The next morning dawned quiet and still. Soft golden light streamed through the curtains as Jack stirred awake in the armchair. His neck ached, but he didn't care. The first thing he looked for was the small bundle on the towel. And there it was, rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The puppy had made it through the night. Jack smiled faintly. The little one was tougher than it looked. Ghost was lying beside it, just as he had the entire night. The older shepherd lifted his head when Jack moved, his eyes calm, no longer full of haunted memories, but something else now, something steady. Ghost hadn't just rescued the puppy. In a way, he was healing himself through it. Jack stood and knelt beside them. He ran a gentle hand over Ghost's back. "You've done good," he whispered. Ghost leaned into the touch, another first. Jack froze for a moment, stunned. Until now, Ghost had always flinched or tensed up at any contact, but this time he allowed it, even welcomed it. That wall, that invisible barrier of pain and distrust, was finally beginning to crack. Jack turned his attention to the puppy. Its eyes were open, still glassy, but curious. Its little body shifted toward Ghost instinctively, as if the big dog's presence offered protection from the world. Jack marveled at the scene. It was like watching a story unfold that had long been in the making. Later that day, Jack took the puppy to the vet. Ghost rode with them, alert and silent in the back seat. The vet, Dr. Amy Lung, examined the puppy thoroughly. She was kind, patient, and gentle as she checked its vitals, gave it fluids, and assessed its injuries. "It's a miracle you found him when you did," she told Jack. "He wouldn't have lasted another day out there. Malnourished, dehydrated, a small infection starting from some of those cuts. But he's going to be okay. With care." Jack nodded, watching Ghost, who stood close to the exam table, not taking his eyes off the puppy. Dr. Lung glanced at him thoughtfully. "Is he the one who found the pup?" Jack nodded again. "Yeah, I followed him into the woods. He knew exactly where to go." Dr. Lung bent down and looked Ghost in the eyes. "He's got a good heart. It's rare, the way animals can sense when someone else is hurting." Jack hesitated. "He's been through a lot. He was shut down for months when I first got him. I never thought I'd see him like this." Dr. Lung gave him a kind smile. "Sometimes, helping someone else heal is how we begin to heal ourselves." Jack didn't say anything, but the words sat heavily in his chest. They returned home just after noon. Jack made a small bed for the puppy in the corner of the living room, layering blankets to keep it warm. Ghost lay beside him again, calm and still. Jack watched from across the room, feeling more like a guest in his own house as he observed the strange, gentle magic playing out between them. Over the next week, the puppy, whom Jack had begun calling Finn, started to gain strength. His limp faded, replaced by a playful wobble. His ribs, once visible under his skin, slowly filled out. He began to explore small corners of the house, though never venturing far from Ghost's side. Ghost, too, was changing. He followed Jack now, not nervously but curiously. He began wagging his tail, just slightly, when Jack came home. He even barked once at a squirrel in the yard, and though it startled both of them, Jack couldn't help but laugh. It was life returning to a dog who'd once forgotten how to live. And it wasn't just Ghost. Jack felt it too. He found himself talking aloud more. First to Ghost, then to Finn. Simple things. "You hungry, buddy?" Or, "That cloud looks like a bone?" He'd catch himself smiling for no reason. The house no longer felt like a place to hide from the world. It was becoming something else, A home. One night, about 10 days after the rescue, something strange happened. Jack was out back, tossing a tennis ball gently for Finn, who now chased it in awkward, adorable bounds. Ghost sat nearby, his ears perked, his eyes attentive. The air was cool, stars beginning to blink into the dusk. Then Finn stopped. His nose went up, sniffing the air. He let out a soft growl. Jack turned, his instincts on edge. What is it? Ghost was up now, too, stiff and alert, looking past the fence toward the woods. Jack squinted into the dark trees. He didn't see anything, but both dogs were tense. Probably just a raccoon, he muttered, trying to reassure himself. But then Finn barked, not a playful yap, something sharper. Jack stepped toward the fence, heart pounding, and that's when he heard it. Footsteps, not animal, human, crunching softly on the underbrush. Jack's breath caught. Who would be out here now? His cabin was remote. Neighbors weren't close, and no one wandered this far by accident. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the tree line. Nothing. Then a voice, low and hushed. Ghost? Jack froze. His blood went cold. The voice sounded familiar, but strained, raspy. Ghost? You out there, boy? The shepherd bolted forward, barking now, not in fear. Recognition. Jack opened the gate, and out of the shadows stepped a man, disheveled, limping, face gaunt with days of stubble and exhaustion. He wore a military jacket. Jack's eyes widened. The man dropped to his knees. Ghost, it's me. It's Caleb. Jack stood frozen at the edge of the yard, his mind reeling as Ghost bolted toward the man. Caleb. The name hit like thunder, unfamiliar to Jack, but clearly etched into Ghost's memory. The shepherd let out a whimper, one Jack had never heard before. It wasn't fear or aggression. It was longing, recognition. A sound torn from deep within. Ghost closed the distance and skidded to a stop in front of the man, tail low, body trembling. Caleb opened his arms slowly, voice breaking. It's okay, boy. It's me. I'm here. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ghost stepped forward, slowly, and nuzzled his head into Caleb's chest. The man crumpled, wrapping his arms around the dog. He buried his face in the thick fur, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jack watched in stunned silence. He felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. After a long, tearful minute, Caleb looked up. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. I was told he didn't survive after the blast. Jack stepped forward cautiously. You're his handler? Caleb nodded. We were deployed together. Ghost saved my life when our unit was ambushed. He took shrapnel to the side, protecting me. Everything was chaos after that. I was medevaced out, unconscious. When I woke up, they said Ghost didn't make it. Jack looked down at the dog, now resting his head in Caleb's lap. He was found weeks later, wounded, scared. He's been through hell. Caleb swallowed hard, emotion raw in his eyes. So have I. They sat together on the porch steps under the stars. Jack made coffee, handed a mug to Caleb, who took it with shaking hands. Ghost lay between them, Finn curled against his side. Caleb spoke quietly, haltingly. I tried to track him. Spent months digging through reports, contacting shelters, rescue groups. Nothing. I finally gave up. Then, 3 days ago, I got a call from someone who saw a post online. A picture of Ghost at a local vet. I hitchhiked here. I had to know. Jack nodded slowly. He never let anyone touch him, until he found Finn. That little guy broke through something in him, and after that, it was like Ghost started to come back to life. That sounds like him. He's looking after the small ones. There was silence between them, broken only by the chirp of crickets and the occasional soft yawn from Finn. Then Caleb asked, Can I take him back with me? Jack looked down at Ghost, who had rolled onto his back, something he only ever did when he felt safe. Vulnerable. Trusting. It wasn't a simple question. Ghost had become more than a dog to Jack. He was a partner in healing, a quiet companion through his own pain. But Jack also knew that look Ghost gave Caleb wasn't just memory. It was loyalty. Love. The kind you don't replace. Jack nodded. If Ghost wants to go with you, he's yours. Caleb blinked hard, his voice barely a whisper. Thank you. The next morning, Jack helped Caleb get a vet clearance and food for the journey. But as they packed up, something unexpected happened. Ghost refused to get in the truck. He stood beside Finn, his body stiff, tail lowered, not in fear, but in protest. Caleb knelt beside him. It's okay, boy, we're going home. Ghost looked between Caleb and Jack, then down at Finn, who whimpered softly at his side. Caleb stood slowly. He's not leaving him, is he? Jack shook his head. I don't think he is. Caleb smiled, a tear escaping down his cheek. Well, maybe home's here now. They made a new plan. Caleb would stay nearby, rent a cabin, rebuild. He needed healing just as much as Ghost once had. And Ghost had found a family now, not just a handler, a pup to protect, a man who understood silence and pain, and another who offered quiet grace when it was needed most. As the sun rose behind the trees, Ghost trotted across the yard, Finn bounding beside him. Jack stood beside Caleb, coffee in hand, hearts full. 3 souls, once broken by war, loss, and fear, had somehow, through fate, instinct, or something greater, found their way back to each other. Together, they began again.